On time. All right, it looks like we're ready to go. Hello, everyone. My name is Ron Roberts, and on behalf of Grand Strand Action Together, I want to welcome you to our discussion. We're going to have a pretty frank discussion about progressive policies and how they can win over voters. Here we are in a midterm election cycle, 2022, not really shaping up, according to polls, to look very promising for liberal and progressive candidates. But with this kind of discussion and maybe you listening in and taking some notes and going forth with the word, maybe we can get some things done here. So I want to start by introducing you to our panelists. And I'm happy again to be joined by Professor Jeremy Holland, a sociology professor at Horry Georgetown Technical College. His research interests include social movements, economics, discourse analysis, and political ideology. He holds a PhD, so he is Dr. Jeremy Holland. Let me get that right. In applied linguistics from Lancaster University in the United Kingdom, with a master's degree in sociology from Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas. Dr. Holland, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad to be here to be discussing this really important strategy. So Thanks for having me on.
And I also want to introduce you to, or introduce everyone to the GSAT intern who's going to be helping us out with some questions and answers if we have questions coming in. That would be CCU student Jamison Bennekin. Jamison, thanks for manning the Q&A for us. We're going to appreciate that as we continue this discussion.
Thank you so much.
He's got radio pipes, I should know. All right, Dr. Holland. First of all, let's talk. Here we are heading into a 2022 election cycle. It's the midterms. Things look bleak for the party that's in power usually anyway. And it's almost as if the perfect storm of obstacles to succeeding in 2022 have formed themselves. So is the Democratic Party, which tends to lean center left, looking the wrong way when it comes to winning voters over in 2022?
I have been thinking about this nonstop for the last 8 weeks and trying to create an argument. And I'm not saying it's a foolproof argument, but I think it can be argued that if the Democrats will embrace the social movements that already have the activists, already have the energy, already have the innovation, already have policies in hand to be enacted. They already know the solutions to our problems. If they would not only just bring them into the party, but kind of have the party and them coalesce, maybe have a conference where all the movements come together with the party and hammer out an agenda that includes the party, and it wouldn't be over. And for that to be successful, I think it wouldn't be over once the election cycle's over. It would have to be this constant going in between the party and the movement of a roundtable discussion of how we need to proceed in organizing people, how we need to proceed and who's included in the decisions within the party structure. I think all that should be on the table because I believe my thesis is that if the Democrats will embrace progressive social movements as a whole, they'll win for decades in Congress, and that we need at least 10 years before we can have substantial change through the law in Congress. So we need about a decade of winning to do that. We know that from the past. So I believe the moderates are important. I don't want to discredit any moderate voices in the party. I think it's a big tent, but I think we should be thinking about a strategy about how to win an electoral strategy that will win for us. Yeah.
I have to wonder, though, again, heading into a midterm election cycle, it almost seems as if the progressives are that somewhat pretty girl that the high school quarterback toys with before choosing to go to the dance with another girl. Progressives, and I speak for them in this case because I happen to be one of them. Progressives, we get sung and danced, we get wined and dined every election cycle to be pulled back into the tent to make sure that our numbers show up. And then once the election's over, the song and dance, the whining and dining, they tend to go away. we saw with the election of Joe Biden and the ushering in of, a slim 50 plus the vice president, Senate, and even, a smaller House majority than we had going into 2020, we still saw an opportunity to get some things done. To the lay American voter who just doesn't understand why the party that has the House, the Senate, and the White House can't get anything done, though, it's been pretty disappointing. And for progressives, very disappointing. So how do we win over progressive voters who have heard this song and dance before, but also realize it's an election cycle? They're going to come at us again. They're going to wine and dine and song and dance us. But do we believe them this time? How do we win over the progressive voter who, quite frankly, might just be disillusioned?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I think there's some things that Biden has done. I mean, there's at least two pieces of major legislation he's gotten through that all of us are glad about, right? So he's got through the $2 trillion American Rescue Plan, right? So that gave us extended unemployment benefits, one-time direct stimulus payments, housing assistance, help for small business. So that was good. Then he did get through kind of a watered down version of his infrastructure bill. It passed at 1.2 trillion. And so that we got the roads and the bridges and the broadband access and a nationwide electric vehicle chargers placed all through the network, and some environmental cleanup. The thing that progressives really wanted, they wanted all that to happen, but the thing they really wanted was what was called the Build Back Better plan, which was another 2.2 trillion. And that was for the people struggling in the country. That was for the child tax credits, for the child care, preschool, sustainable housing, elderly home care, paid medical leave. Every first world country has that but us. 80% of Americans want it. Universal pre-K, a fast track plan to eliminate greenhouse gas within the next 30 years. These are the things that progressives have wanted. A few other things I'll mention that progressives are sore about. Joe Biden promised us he was going to eliminate up to $50,000 per student for higher education debt. He has failed to do anything on that. He could do it easily with the executive order. We know that. He promised us a 15 an hour minimum wage. He promised us guaranteed family leave. He said he was going to boost the union organizing laws, which we failed to get passed through Congress so far. So there's a lot of, wow, we're really glad we got some things done, but there's a lot left to be done that progressives are looking at the administration and going, is this really what we wanted? I mean, it seems like he made us a lot of promises that you could, I know you're pushing, but it seems like you're not pushing hard enough or something like this, but I think the party has to change. Not only do the progressives have to change their orientation, that's not just the issue. There has to be a coming together of the party and the progressives where they're just interlinked. It can't be like, well, we have some there needs to be a party where it just embraces them and says, hey, look, you're the future, you're the young people. Our movement is about progress. If that's what we're really about, you have all the ideas. Let's racially reconcile. Let's bring LGBTQ people in. Let's pay teachers a living wage. Let's get all these people together that want something that the government could do, but there's been such this ultra right narrative that the government is the enemy and that we don't want the government involved. But that's just a strategy. That's their strategy. That's the opposite strategy of what I'm talking about tonight. Their strategy is basically make all the people afraid of the government, make them forget they are the government, as if the government were some of this tyrannical thing somewhere far off in Washington, D.C. And so that they say, well, just leave us alone, government, and we won't ask anything from you, and you won't ask anything from us, and we'll just pretend like we're, we'll just try to stay at each other's business. But that narrative has destroyed the middle class, and it has sucked all the money up into the upper class, and it's kind of.
And in that regard, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Tell everybody that, government is inefficient and doesn't work. And then when they get into office, they sabotage government to make it inefficient so it doesn't work. Yes. And then repeat. I mean, we've been dealing with this, since 1981, if not longer. And again, it's a tried and true tactic on the right. Ironic in that, right now, folks are clamoring for government to do something about gas prices. And the problem is there's just only so much government can do about gas prices because we're not in a socialistic country where, our fossil fuel industry is a state-run industry, but they want government to do something. It's just ironic. And pointing that out, just doesn't seem to turn on light bulbs. It just seems to frustrate people that much more. But I digress. We're not here to try and talk about how to win over right-wing voters. We're here to, and maybe we are in some respects. I remember my grandmother in 2016, a strident Reagan era Republican, was just deeply, deeply in love with the Bernie Sanders platform in 2016. She didn't like Hillary Clinton. She loved Bernie Sanders, and that's again, a Reagan Republican. So with that in mind, here it is 2022, and you let off with social policy, and that's really where I think a lot of disaffected voters on the left are scratching their heads going, what did I vote for? I'm sitting here looking at your presentation, and we're talking about the minimum wage that, well, here we are. We still don't have a minimum wage increase. The Black Lives Matter movement. What have we done with social justice since Biden and Senate Democrats were sworn in? So is it too late to move the needle there, or is it going to seem disingenuous in a midterm cycle?
I think there are a lot of bills, and we do have a progressive caucus, right? So there, if you look, that's really, anybody interested in progressive politics, you look up our progressive caucus and you'll see who's in it. And they already have legislation. A lot of it has passed through the House because Democrats have such a majority, is that a lot of things have passed through the House. The problem isn't the House, the problem is the Senate. We can't get the things through the Senate. And so if we can't get through the Senate, it can't get to the president to be passed. So, but okay, with that said, all right, that's about and this is what we're talking about, trying to organize to stop these. We need vast majorities in both houses, so, but I just want to mention,
Holland, is that going to happen? I mean, 2022 looks bleak. I mean, we're probably going to take a step backwards.
I have an idea about what I think the party should do, but it's my opinion.
Go for it. Let's hear it.
And this is what I think. I mean, I'll just say it pretty straight out. This is what's going to be the grand finale, but let's just talk about it because I think it's maybe.
Did I ruin your rundown?
Not at all. But I think this is what's really important. I want to. Okay, here's what I think. Three steps. I think that we could change what's going to happen. Will the Democrats do this? I don't know. Number one, the Democratic Party must take seriously the economic movements, the identity movements, and the public safety movements in their worldviews. And what I mean by that is that movements like Fight for 15, I just want to put a few on the screen here. Let's see. The economic movements, you got Fight for 15, which has been highly successful, getting millions of people in our country $15 minimum wage, probably the most strident and successful economic movement we've had in the last 10 years. These aren't people just sitting around in book clubs thinking about Marxist theory or something like this. These are people on the streets out there asking their bosses, and of course the government has to intervene and usually does it for them. Used to, we had a collective bargaining table. Now we have to go get the government involved because they won't even bargain with us anymore. But this is what they're doing. The Poor People's Campaign, that have great policies for the people at Build Back Better Act I've mentioned. Red for Ed, the second group besides the Fight 15, the Red for Ed, these are teachers in Republican states that have come out and won great gains. Arizona teachers won 20% raise for all their teachers because they refused to go back into the classroom until they did it. They said, well, how long is the strike going to last? They said, we'll see just until we get the raise, I guess. And they finally gave it to them. The Debt Collective of saying abolish all student loans. So there's these economic movements that should get involved, identity movements, the Black Lives Matter movement, fourth wave feminism. the LGBTQ movement, the dreamers, I think the immigrants that children have been here for their whole lives should be included in this discussion. And then the last movements I want to bring up are public safety movements, like the Sunrise Movement, which is a very youth energized, stormed the halls of Congress and Nancy Pelosi's office, and AOC came and talked. And it was really a wonderful day for me, actually, to see that. The March for Our Lives kids in Parkland, Florida, that witnessed school shootings and went out and said, no, we're not just going to sit here and be afraid. We're going to change policy, And then indigenous sovereignty, we've seen the struggles with the No Dakota Access Pipeline. What I'm saying is all these movements have energy already. It's not like we got to, where are the Democrats at? Let's just see if we can get enough of them excited to go out and canvas. Well, these people are already upset about either the economic system or how their identity is treated in the public square, or understanding things about science that have been rejected by a lot of people in our country. And so all these grievances, but I would also say it's not just a grievance, it's also the hope that's inside of these movements to actually change. They're not just sitting there going, well, it's just like this. So like they're already organizing. I think if the party could organize alongside and say, hey, we want all these things too, and we believe in your movement, and you should have a seat at the table. And I think that's a good way to reach out to progressives. So I think number one thing has 7 is the Democratic Party should have a national convention in Chicago or Kansas or somewhere and invite every single movement that I've just mentioned, the leaders of those movements, to that, and hammer out a policy agenda and say, hey, look, this isn't over when the election's over. We're a movement party now. We're a party of movements. And then I think the Democratic National Convention should elect a social movements liaison that is constantly going between the movements and the party all year round, every year, not even during an election cycle. And there's a constant moving, it's porous, it's a constant moving in between the party and the movement. I think right now we have a party and we have all these movements. And the party looks at it and goes, man, we kind of like all that stuff. There's progressives in our party, so we like that. But it doesn't include everyone together. It's just kind of like an acknowledgement, like we like Black lives and we like LGBTQ people, right? But it's like, okay, thank you. Thanks for affirming everything. And I that's good. That's a good first step, but it's not the last step.
Right.
So this is kind of what I'm thinking right now.
So it seems to me like, we see every year there's a CPAC convention. Those folks get together on the regular, and not just in an election year. It seems as if that the Democratic Party, the liberal side of the aisle, needs to address that. We don't need to be just showing up every 2 years or every 4 years. Again, predictably when votes are needed. These organizations you talk about, the Poor People's Campaign, the Fight for 15, Red for Ed, the Debt Collective. They're not the power brokers within or for the Democratic Party. I harken back to 2016. To me, 2016 is where I go back and say, this is where the Democratic Party really messed up with a lot of progressives. Obviously, it was a bitter fought primary between the two presidential candidates that came down to the wire. What I remember seeing, and this was me, the progressive. I remember seeing, a lot of those, stalwart, democratically aligned organizations, Human Rights Campaign, National Organization of Women, Planned Parenthood. All of these endorsements came racing out once the race became interesting. And what I find noteworthy about that was they were endorsing the eventual nominee long before they normally do. They normally wait till the party has determined who the nominee is going to be. There was a bit of a rallying of the troops on the establishment moderate side of the Democratic Party spectrum, and I feel like there's still a little bit of that resentment. I mean, listen, I'm sitting here talking about there's still a little bit of that resentment 6 years later on the progressive side, and I'm wondering how do we fix that? and I think you're onto something. We have to start meeting, the party has to start meeting with these organizations, not just during an election year, just to glad hand them and let them know, that they're aware of the plight, but also to have frank discussions about what is being done, what isn't being done, and where we go from here. Everybody has right now, everybody on their social media has something Ukrainian, on their social media. I liken it to the same thing. It's like, okay, great. Thanks for putting that bumper sticker on your car. How is that saving your Ukrainian life? It's the same thing for me with the Democratic Party. The lip service every 2 or every 4 years. Okay, that's nice, but what are you actually doing?
Yeah, I think it runs really deep, Ron, and I think there has to be some reconciliation work done before the feelings are really going to come out and everyone feel good about it. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this, but I do want to point out I kind of did a little background research about that election season you brought up. A few things we have to understand and about what happened recently in the party, and you don't want to push on the divisions in the party, because some progressives are going to be like, well, these are just neoliberals who are funded by Wall Street, so how could we ever trust these moderates, right? And then the moderates are going to look at some progressives and go, these are just utopians, and they're going to make us lose because they think all this can happen, and not enough Americans believe that, and so they're too far ahead or something like this, right? And so, but we have to come to terms with this, and I just want to point out a couple of facts. The Sanders campaign was intentionally submarined by the DNC in 2016. There were 20,000 DNC emails that were leaked by WikiLeaks. In those, we found the deputy communication director suggesting to all the DNC heads that they present a unified narrative that Bernie had never had his act together and his campaign was a mess. The chair, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, made sure to cut off the campaign's access to the voter database so they would have a hard time securing informed demographic data. This was a coordinated campaign. And then later, Donna Brazile, who was a former interim chair of the party, came out and said, what happened was the party was $24 million in debt. This is all on the record. I promise you can fact check any of this. The party was $24 million in debt. So they decided that there would be a joint fundraising agreement between the party and the Hillary campaign. And in exchange for that, Hillary would pay off the debt, but also she would control the party's finances, the strategy, the money raised. And so the DNC was under control of the Hillary campaign almost a year before she was nominated. When this came out, the DNC chair resigned, the CEO chair resigned, CFO resigned, and so did the communications director. This happened right before we had our big party rally, the convention last. So what I'm saying is we had a neoliberal takeover of the party, and you can think of that in some sense. And so what had to happen the next time around when Joe Biden and Sanders were on the ticket, they had to make some promises to the Sanders campaign, say, hey, look, we'll be more fair this time and make sure it's more of a fair race, and did try to give some concessions to the Sanders side of the debate. But I just want to say that happened this didn't happen decades. This just happened a few years ago. The party's going to have to change its mind. And I know we have new leadership, and so I'm not critiquing the leadership we have now, because I don't know. I just don't understand that much. But looking at what happened very recently, you have to think, well, the party really was thinking we can't look this progressive. They wanted to paint Sanders as a crazy person, and figure out any strategy they could to stop him from winning. So in order for progressives to really to be able to trust the party, there has to be some discussion about that, I think. And,
no, I agree. And you know what, yeah. this entire, we frame this entire discussion about progressive policies and how they win over voters. You could go line by line, from the Sanders platform in 2016, the one that was largely adopted by the party. You could go through, some of the points of the Build Back Better plan. You started peeling off some of the items in Build Back Better, and I started wondering myself, like, why don't we just like one off these bills? They're so hard to vote against.
Yeah.
Instead of, one omnibus bill, just start pushing them through as small pieces of legislation and make Republicans say no, because they're wildly popular with the American voter.
Yes.
That to me is the head scratcher. Look, I understand it's really hard to make the sausage in Washington. And I'm not a sausage maker, but it just seems to me like if you just an up-down vote on, some of the items in Build Back Better, to me, not all that different than the way it was with the Affordable Care Act. Do we want to make sure that Americans under the age of 26 can stay on their parents' health? Yes, that was wildly popular. Do we want to make sure that you can't be turned down for any reason? As far as healthcare coverage, that was wildly popular, but nobody liked Obamacare for like the first 10 years it was in existence. So again, I wonder, like, how do we convince the American voter that likes all these progressive policies that voting for progressive politicians that espouse those policies is the sound way to go? And I'll start by, how do we get them involved in Democratic primaries to vote for progressive candidates so that they're on the general ballot, and then get them to show up again in November?
All right. I want to.
No problem. Solve it.
I want to propose something from what you're saying. I think that there's this idea that there's no precedent for what I've been talking about. Like, that is, well, this is kind of a utopian dream. If we could bring the liberals and the progressives together, we'd have this unstoppable coalition, but maybe it's just too hard to do because we have so many different views on things, even within the party. But we have recent history to show, and that's not true. And I want to point out something that happened. The New Deal coalition that was formed in the 1930s, and then we have a Great Society coalition that's formed in the 1960s. What they did was what I'm talking about. They brought, in the New Deal coalition, you had organized labor, the working class, physically vulnerable people, and racial minorities coming together. And look what happened. Listen to this. I want you to hear this. When the New Deal came into play in 1933, the Democrats enjoyed unbroken majority control of the House from 1933 to 47, and then again from 1949 to 1995. So they were in control of this entire 62-year time span of the House and the Senate, except for 2 sessions. And then in the House, in the Senate, they had unbroken control from 1933 to 1981. That's 48 years of unbroken succession. What I'm saying is, the reason that they were able to maintain sustained majorities within the Congress for so long is because they had brought in the movements. And you can see this. The way I would argue for someone who's unsure about the strategy, I would say, look at what they got passed. I just want to bring up a few things. They created the Job Corps that put 100,000 people to work. I'm sorry, I'm a little ahead of myself. The National Labor Act, that put all these people to work. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration. These put millions of people to work rebuilding our country. And you have to think about the parallels right here with me for a second economically. Not since this period, the 1930s, during the Great Depression, have we seen economic inequality be so harsh. They were up to 25% unemployment, and the numbers of how the wealth was distributed was so imbalanced. And it's not since that time. Today we're more unbalanced. We haven't seen an imbalance in our country since that time till today. So I think we're in a very similar situation where people that are being crushed on the bottom, that are looking for other alternatives in politics besides what they see. I think this is a good time to bring those people to the table and say, hey, we have policies that can meet all these needs. We just need to come together and do it. The same thing, I'll just bring one more coalition up, which was the Great Society coalition. This was in the 1960s. Think what was accomplished under Johnson. He passed 200 laws through Congress. Medicare, food stamps, urban renewal, investment in the public schools, an end to European immigration only policy, basically, an all-out war on poverty. Think about this. He doubled what we spent on poverty. Within 10 years, poverty dropped from 20% to 10% in our country. So he passed the Voting Rights Act, which allowed basically Black people to vote in our country for the first time. That was only 50 years ago. So that Black people could actually vote in our country because the president was able to get this through the Congress. I mean, it's these coalitions that's able to make these, it's like we're kind of waiting for the progress to come. And then all of a sudden, when the presidency and the Congress and the movements align, it's like when the stars align, you have these sustained majorities for like 20, 30 years, you can actually run the country. You can actually run it. You know, if you're not going between Republican and Democrat every time, when you take control, if the party can figure out how to recreate this, I would say we can recreate a Green New Deal coalition. We can bring all these movements I'm talking about into them, saying all your solutions, all your policy solutions are important. We support all your policy solutions. We're going to try to pass them no matter what. If we came in and gave that much cred to the movements, I think they would respond to that. You know, I think you have to be gracious. You know, if you're gracious to the movement leaders and say, hey, you know, we've left you out of a lot of decisions, but we think it's as good for all of us. You know, our party, your movement. You know,
yeah, I mean, this sounds fantastic, but you know, even this sounds pie in the sky. And this is why the Biden presidency frustrates me so far. First of all, I'm of the opinion that he's probably a one-term president, whether he wants to be or not. Just because of the metrics of the situation, also his age, and I feel like maybe that should have been the sales pitch all along. You know, I'm going to be a one-term guy. I think the jury's out on whether or not Kamala Harris is the heir apparent because she's sort of been in the background. But you know, a one-term president who, you know, gives no crap, you know, who just doesn't, you know, he's not worried about polls. He's not worried about, you know, his reelection chances. He's worried about doing what's right for the American people. You know, legacy be damned.
yeah.
I feel like this is the opportunity, you know, for someone who's in that position to show that this isn't about me. This isn't about my family. This isn't about my kids. This isn't about, you know, a legacy. This is about doing what's right for the American people. So I'm going in guns a-blazing. This is going to be my 4 years. I'm not worried about polls and reelection opportunities. I'm just going to do what's right. And everything Joe Biden has said, you know, since, you know, coming up on inauguration and since then is, no, he's definitely running again. So if he's running again, what you're suggesting sounds wonderful, but when is the party going to roll out the red carpet and invite all these, you know, these different organizations in to coalesce under that tent? Again, it's a midterm cycle, so it almost seems like if they did it this year, okay, take us out to dinner again. What do you want from us? Do you get what I'm saying?
I think it would honestly, for me, looking at the long picture, right? Any year is a good year to start this. Like, even if it was right, I mean, even if we would have done this right after Trump was elected the first time, like let's say we did this in 2017, what would have been the outcome of 2020? You know what I mean? Like, it would have totally changed the entire primaries, you know, the Democratic primaries. So I think anytime is a good time to start this and just let everyone know. I mean, it has to be complete buy-in, and the party has to go all in. Everyone has to buy in and together and say, we're just doing this now. This is what we're doing. You know, it's not like I'll see you in a few years. It's just like, I'll see you probably this next month in a Zoom meeting somewhere where we discuss how, you know, I mean, I think there just has to be this constant, I mean, I love this, there's this book title, Democracy is a Never-Ending Conversation. You know, and I think that's what needs to happen in the party. I think if we're the democracy party or the, you know, Democratic, we should really foster that amongst our movements. I mean, they are the bastions of our democracy. I mean, that's where collective decision making is made outside of institutions. You know, so I mean, they're small little experiments in democracy for us to look at and to learn from. I think the party should learn from them, and they should learn from the party. They should learn how to organize from the party, and the party should learn how to empathize with the people in those movements. And there should be a mutual exchange, you know.
I agree 1,000%. I'm just wondering when it's going to happen. I mean, seriously. I mean, gosh, I hate to be the cynic. I just do. I hate to be the cynic. but I've lived through, like, full, candor. I'm a 48-year-old, LGBTQ, Southern-born male who has lived through, a mostly Republican existence, not just, locally, but, for much of my life, whereas my party's actually been winning elections and not winning control. So the cynicism just sort of seeps in over time. I'm watching, you mentioned March for Our Lives, and I follow, a lot of the David Hoggs and the Cameron Caskys of that movement on Twitter, and they're disillusioned. They're wondering where all this stuff that you mentioned is when it's going to show up.
I really can't fathom why the party won't bring these people into a big. We're supposed to be a big tent party anyway. I can't fathom why they wouldn't use this as an opportunity. I mean,
oh, they do.
Yeah.
It's usually in an election year. I mean, we all remember Occupy Wall Street, right? And do we remember just how lukewarm the then president was about Occupy Wall Street? I mean, that was to me a blistering sign of something boiling under the surface that needed to be addressed. And the most liberal president of our lifetime at the time.
Yeah, I hear you. I think I think that's a good point, because I think this is something else we need to talk about. There is a hesitancy. There's this kind of weird thing that happens. It's like, we need you. You're on my email list. Give me the money.
Yeah.
And then they say, hey, look, we're the experts. We know how to do the deals. That's what you elected us for. And just let us do our thing. And the movements are like, well, wait a minute. I thought we were all like mobilizing. What's really interesting, I don't want to focus this on too much, but I think it's really interesting about the right wing. They're constantly mobilizing. I mean, this guy, their leader, is out there, even not during election time. He's out there running around in giant stadiums talking to people about his ideas all the time. Where on the Democratic side do you see that happening? I'm serious. They're constantly mobilizing their so-called moral majority. So they're riling the troops all the time. It's every year. It's not every 3 years for them. We need to counterbalance this kind of right-wing social movement activity. We need a full-time. I'm not saying the president needs to go out there all the time, constantly, but if the movements were given a platform through the party, for instance, let's have a Green New Deal summit in Chicago. Everyone come. Next time we're going to have a Black Lives Matter summit in Los Angeles. Next week we're going to have a LGBTQ summit in Nashville, and have it sponsored by the party, and bring in all the leaders of the movements, and constantly mobilizing all over the country in the colleges. Call up every college Democratic club and say, hey, we're going to bring these movements. We're going to travel. That's what March for Our Lives did. Right after they did a school tours. They went through all around the schools in the entire country and talked about the policies that they were trying to get passed, which are really common sense policies, honestly, even for gun owners, common sense policies. I'm just saying, why aren't we just constantly mobilizing like this?
Yeah, right. There seems to be a sense of lethargy and contentment. Well, we're in.
Okay, good.
Whew, okay, we won that marathon. Let's sit here and stare at the trophy for a little while. Instead of getting active. We talk about the first 100 days after a president's sworn in, how important the first 100 days are, and then it's like after that first 100 days. And look, I understand. Progressives have to understand as well that we have to, unfortunately, work with the Joe Manchins and the Kirsten Sinnemas of the world, who are going to give us about 10% of what we want and say no to us 90% of the time, which is better than saying no 100% of the time if we ran them off to the Republican Party. But again, here we are in an election cycle. We have key Senate races that are, in my mind, winnable races, but we've got to ramp up the enthusiasm. So who do we have to talk to within the party to get this ball rolling. Like, I like this idea. I like this barnstorming idea. I like the idea of, I almost liken it to like a home improvement expo where you want to have the window guy and the floor guy and the carpeting guy and the deck builder. And, all these people show up under one roof and hand out pamphlets and, get to know each other and glad hand and have little demonstrations and, speakers. So who's going to do it? Does the party have to do it, or CPAC isn't a Republican
Yes.
Party, conference? It's just put together by somebody who rents out
that's
an arena
true.
and has the crazies show up every year to speak their bile.
Yeah, I just think I think the party should step up and do it because they already have the organizational know-how. They already have the structure. They have money. They have money. they could easily do it. It would raise them way more money than they have right now, actually, if they would invest in what we're talking about, and they would have way more people rush into their party. So it'd be a money-making thing anyway. There's no downside. Jamison, do you want to make a comment, or is there any questions?
There's been a couple comments from a couple people. I see one from Ashlyn. She just put one. She said, "Is there a way to create change outside of electoral politics?"
I think culturally, you know what I mean? I think that when I look at, like, for instance, I think people in the counterculture that says, "Hey, we're not gonna be obsessed with consumerism. We're going to be minimalists." I think that can have a big impact on people, change our minds about what we're doing. I think those kinds of things can happen outside of electoral politics and can affect electoral politics down the road, but I don't think directly. I think, what do you think, Ron? What do you think about that?
Well, Dr. Holland, don't you think, though, that like gay marriage didn't come about electorally? It came about because society pushed for it. I mean, let's give Joe Biden credit for that too. I mean, he kind of outed Obama, as being pro-gay when Obama didn't win office because he was pro-gay. He was not pro-gay marriage. He was very, kind of soft. Speaking of, like, showing up to take the checks all the time and glad hand, a voting block, the LGBTQ, we were always showing up for Democrats, and we had Democrats showing up at our little events and whatnot and telling us, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we got your back when it's time. But we had to wait on society to evolve because the party wasn't pushing.
Yeah. So that's a good point.
There was another one that came to mind, and I kind of lost track.
Yeah, I think as far as the inevitability of legalization of marijuana, I think has been a cultural issue that's going to eventually overwhelm all the federal government, and eventually we're just going to say it's going to be like alcohol or something.
But Democrats aren't going to get credit for that. They're not, because they haven't pushed for it, and they don't deserve credit for it.
Yeah. No, the people do. The people deserve credit for it.
Right. Jamison, there's another?
Other person, Ken Kruger, he had like a block of comments, so I'm going to try to go by one. Reading it, but one comment he said was the DNC needs to reorganize their standing committees and put people who have had real life experience in the committees. I have yet to see anyone who takes this suggestion seriously, at least in South Carolina. I feel that the South Carolina Democratic Party really only consists of a dozen or so individuals, and only their ideas are valid. That's one comment he had.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't know that personally, that how the inner structure of the local party works. I'll say my personal experience with the local party, of course, I can't speak to the state party because I haven't met anybody from the state party, but from the local party in Horry County, they've invited me to come speak. Every time I come, we have great conversations. I've become friends with people in the communications committee, and I write articles for them sometimes. I do think there is a critique that I think is important in what you said, though. I've been to a lot of the different party meetings. I've been to the South Enders and North Strand and all around. Maybe I've been to about 6 or 7 different meetings because I'm interested in this kind of thing. And I'm the youngest guy in the room. I'm 43. Okay. you look at the social movements, and they're usually even run by young people younger than me, so, in their 30s and their late 20s, they have more experience than I would at kind of these organizing activities anyway. But I think there's a point there. Where is the youth? And maybe that's a critique for the youth, not just for, you know what I mean? Where is the youth in the party? How can we feel connected in our issues? Like, I mean, think about, you got the younger millennials, right? You got Generation Z, which is your generation in college, all born after 1997, right?
And look, I know it seems gauche for us to, just rail on the party, but at the same time, the under 30 voter, it's like you said, they're not showing up to participate in the machinations. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just, I don't know if they feel like it's a sense of an unwelcome environment, or they're just, they're too busy because, they're going to college and having to work 3 jobs for it, or, working for $12 an hour and have kids and just don't have the time to do that. Whatever the reason is, they find the time, or they get impassioned when it's time to show up for a rally, but they may not, want to or have the time to be involved in the party machinations. But they have to show up. If the under 30 voter wants to be taken seriously, they have to show up in greater numbers, and not just every 4 years, but in midterms too. It's really important that the under 30 voter that was motivated in 2020 is as motivated, if not more, in 2022, because so much is at stake.
I will say one more thing about our local party too. They have just included a younger person on their committee. I believe that she's an African American lady in her early 30s, and she's very active in the party. And so I think there is an awareness of this issue, and that there are things trying to be done right now to correct it. I feel that when I talk to different people in leadership.
That's great.
I don't know how helpful that is.
Well, having lived there myself until 2018, I was there for 11 years, and I was, a member of the South Ender Democrats, president for a year or two. One of the things that we were always, making noise about was, do we have a presence, on the college campuses? Is there a CCU Dems? And there at the time wasn't much of one. And there were, some rumblings of there starting to be, some high school campus Democratic Party meetings. And so that was encouraging. If you're going to tell me that there's more of that now in Horry County, then I'm going to tell you how excited I am, because that's very important.
Yeah.
But you're not telling me.
I have a few more questions. Another one from Ken, and he asks, how do we neutralize work within the framework of all the new voter suppression laws? It is fine to push a progressive policy, but if our supporters cannot vote, what good is it?
Good question. I feel like for a lot of the suppression, movement, or the suppression items that show up, in the various laws that have been passed, not just in recent, the last 2 years, but when photo IDs became, the hot topic, instead of, getting mobilized and helping voters get those photo IDs that they needed, it just seemed like, liberals were licking their wounds for 4 to 5 years, and, woe is me. And okay, it's passed. You got to deal with what's been passed. And that means helping people get those photo IDs that they need. So is that the answer, Dr. Holland, to just understand that these laws exist and we have to work around them to win these elections anyway?
It's really hard right now. There's more conservatives control the state houses than in our, it's more conservative politics in the states than it is in the federal government. So we have to understand that first. And we have to understand that over 30 states have passed through voter suppression laws already this last couple of years. So Ron's already recognizing all these facts and saying, what can we do? We have laws, again, that have passed through the House that are sitting in the Senate that would correct all of these things. We're short just a few votes. It's really sad to say that, but that's really what it boils down to. So it shows you how important, though, it is to get the majorities. This is what I'm trying to talk about. We have to get these majorities. It's not enough just to get a bunch of money from Wall Street and just get more rich people to try to fund the Democratic Party. That's a losing strategy in the long term.
Yep.
It doesn't, do people know it's all rigged? If we do it that way, then it's like, well, you're just going to always cut taxes and you're never going to tax the rich and you're never going to just redistribute it back to people, the workers, and everything's being inflated. Everything's going up in price except my labor. Gas is more expensive, education is more expensive, social services is more expensive, but my work's not more expensive, right? How could that be the case, right? And the Congress doesn't do anything about it. We have the people feel like the government's heartless, and it makes those young people. I think the main reason you don't see young people in the Democratic Party is, they need to learn how to sit in a business meeting. I agree with that. It's okay to sit through a business meeting, but they feel apathetic. They feel like, well, what's the difference if I vote or not, or if I do anything? Because even if we have Democrats in charge, it looks like it's just the same thing, except maybe the guy's not so racist as the other guy. That's what else did I win? You know what I mean? Or something like that.
Yeah, and it's easy to lose track of, the infrastructure bill, but that was a rather large infrastructure bill. I think if you want to take the cynical point of view, the problem with the infrastructure bill was it was long overdue. We're talking about a 12-year tab. That's an infrastructure bill that Obama wanted to pass. And as the problems persist, it's like owning a house. If you ignore the rot on the exterior of your home, it's not going to get better by not doing anything about it. It's only going to get worse. And if you wait 12 years, you're going to have a lot more rot to deal with. So the infrastructure bill was historically large, but it was historically large because it was historically necessary too.
Yeah.
So again, we talk about voter apathy going into 2022. Polls don't look good right now. And any of that can change. But again, metrics we're dealing with high inflation. We're dealing with gas prices that are affecting every household. The war in Ukraine is not helping that. And we're kind of sitting on the sidelines, which doesn't motivate anybody either. Is all of this even remotely something that, a batch of items that can be overcome by liberals and progressives?
I really hope so. One thing that I'm on the fence about whether it could help us is how crazy the Republicans actually will go if they continue to go stop the steal and the election was a fraud and they put Trump up again as the guy. It could be good for us in a way, I think, but I think it's dangerous. It's for them to do that. So I think that could mobilize voters. We know this is true, Ron, in social science. People come to the polls more when they're angry than they vote more for what they're afraid of than for their dreams.
Well, that's what
and so there has to be some kind of thing that gets people to think it's good, the world's going to end or something bad's going to happen. And so I have to stop it, because most people will vote just not to lose what they have. They don't want to lose what they have. They'll vote for that more than to get something.
Right. That's what scares me right now. I think most American voters are upset. They're upset about what groceries are costing them and what it costs to fill the tank. And whether listen, we all know that, like, the inflation issue, the gas prices, they're all global problems. Americans are, let's be honest, we're focused on ourselves. We don't know that. We don't care. We just want it fixed. And I tried to explain this to a friend of mine who is right of center. I'm like, well, this is a problem that we all brought on ourselves. We don't like mass transit. We don't like carpooling. We all like to ride in our own cars and listen to our own music and drive at our own time. We've left mass transit to major cities and demonize them. We don't fund them. Heaven forbid we even discuss light or high-speed rail. Ironically, in the state of Florida, a state that the Republicans have controlled for a while, there is high-speed rail starting to show up between West Palm and Fort Lauderdale and Miami, and now they're going to connect that to the Miami airport, and it's going to go to Orlando and eventually to Tampa. But we're not seeing that sort of thing happen on a nationwide scale. You mentioned earlier all the eye rolling within the establishment about some of this stuff being utopian or pie in the sky. What is wrong with dreaming? I feel like dreaming and thinking big, that JFK, moonshot moment. I feel like that ideology has just, it's become caricaturized and made a negative instead of a positive. Do you disagree?
No, but if you read history and you look back at what FDR did when he enacted the Social Security Act, which basically cut our elderly poverty below 8%.
Right.
We have the highest child poverty rate in the 31 most industrialized countries. We're number one, the highest child poverty rate. We could cut child poverty in half easily. We have the money. It's not a problem. It's not a problem in getting the money. It's just dreaming something like that. I mean, can you imagine before the New Deal and we got the Social Security Act? When you get old, if you used to have children to take care of you and you didn't have enough money saved up, you're just dependent on charity. Maybe the church or people that sit in the town that might have known you growing up. And so this completely revolutionized how we treat elderly people in our country. And we have to have these moments of saying, hey, look, why are we the richest country in the world and have the highest rate of child poverty among all industrialized countries? Let's just stop it. And that's what this whole universal pre-K and childcare thing was about in the Build Back Better.
Okay.
So let's just stop it and just give these kids some money. Why are we doing this?
Again, why not? Why does it have to sit in an omnibus bill instead of a standalone? Who is going to vote against that if that's the only thing on the bill?
Yeah.
Make Joe Manchin vote against universal pre-K.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, and even at the time, all of those things FDR was doing, the propaganda on the other side was calling him socialist. Not that I think that's a bad word, but in a lot of Americans' minds, that is a bad word. And so they're going to say that about anybody who wants to help the people. They're going to say that as a slang derogatory word to try to discredit people. Anybody that wants to help other people, they're going to say they're a socialist. Even though I think there's a lot to admire about that set of thought. So it's the same. It's like we see history repeat. We're just saying, hey, it's like you get something and they say, well, see, you got this. So what are you complaining about anymore? Well, there's all these other things that need to be done.
Right.
Right.
No, absolutely. Nobody likes socialism until a blizzard, and then they want those federal snowplows showing up to they can get it. And that's a mindset problem. I think it's a messaging problem. I think Democrats have had a real problem with messaging for the last 3 to 4 decades. They don't have a Frank Luntz on their side of the spectrum that can wordsmith, phraseology in a way that, wins over American voters. But again, when you look at the polling on individual policy items, Democrats, and I'll go beyond Democrats, progressives have the fertile ground.
I totally agree. Let me just point out a few of those policies that I've figured out that we do all agree on. Like basically most Republicans agree on these too.
Right.
Here's a few. Paid parental leave, government funding for childcare. Over 50% of Republicans are for these things. Boosting minimum wage, tuition-free public college. That's more of a left thing, but a majority of Americans want that. Medicare for all. All those are wildly popular policies.
Mm-hmm.
We have the, if you just saw it was, is this a democracy, right? If you ask that question, it says, well, we got the majorities on all these policy issues. So if we set these representatives up there and they're voting what we want, then obviously they looked at the statistics like us and they realized this is what the people want and they go there and vote for it. That's not what happens.
Right. But we're not a democracy. We're a representative republic. We have a gerrymandered House. We have a Senate that favors rural agrarian states over actual people in densely populated areas. We have an electoral college that affects who becomes the president because we capped the House at 435 for some inexplicable reason in the 1930s and haven't grown it since. It sounds almost treasonous to say this, but we really need to tinker with the way our federal government works and functions too. That's a big to-do item. Like to me, it's a simple one. Uncap the House. Why are we stuck at 435? It should be at least double that by now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
that fixes the
agree.
electoral college, you know? I mean, think about it. Democrats have won 7 of the last 8, presidential elections by popular vote, but have only been seated for 5 of those 8. And the 2 they didn't win, or 2 of the 3 that they didn't win, they saw George W. Bush and Donald Trump seat people in the Supreme Court that now have us at a 6-3 disadvantage. To me, that is a recipe for disaster. We have a very slim, a super slim majority, almost just barely tilting liberal population, but we have a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court that keeps anything that the majority wants from actually sticking. To me, it's a recipe for danger. It's pre-1917, Russian Revolution recipe.
Yeah, the way I totally agree with everything you just said, actually. And the way I view the system, what I would call is corporatism, a form of corporatism, where the corporations kind of run the Congress and the media, and and they have now we know through the Citizens United Supreme Court case that they have unlimited power to spend on candidates. I don't think we could really call ourselves a true democracy until we overturn these, until we have a spending limit that even a poor person could afford, like $50 or something. Like it has to be fair, because money equals speech now in our country. Yep. And mm-hmm. That's not democracy. We know advertising works, right? So that's not just because you can advertise more, you can win. That's not how it's supposed to work. So I think we can't really call ourselves a democracy until we overturn that decision. Until then, we're just run by the financial elites in the country. I think they figured out how to rig it.
Again, this is a messaging problem. We've listened for more than 4 decades as the right talked about, people being afraid of big government. Well, why are we less afraid of big business than we are big government? At least with big government, I can choose who sits on the board of directors, who's in the CEO chair. I can't choose who runs Texaco or Exxon. I can't choose, who's on the board of directors for my, whatever grocery chain I go to, or the Walton family, owners of Walmart. I can't choose those people. I can choose who runs big government, but I can't choose big business. So why does that message not get hammered home more? If you think you fear big government, you really need to be afraid of big business, because they're the ones controlling big government right now.
I totally agree. I think it's a lot about educating where the power actually lies, how it's distributed. Some bad ideas that have been around for a long time about the virtue of the individual over the collective. It's to such a hyper degree that's like we can't question anybody who's rich because they're automatically virtuous, right? And if you're not rich, how dare you, because you didn't work this hard, whatever our what we've been teaching the kids for so long in the schools. You're on your own. That's what we teach kids. You're on your own, and you better make it. And if you don't, you're a loser. And if you do, you're a winner and good. You got money. But if you don't, too bad. It's all your fault. This is just, it's hyper individualism, and these ideas really do affect our people to the point to where, like, we can't even critique anyone who has money, or we have to feel ashamed that we don't. All these kinds of weird feelings that our ideology tries to place upon us in the system. But this is all a system of control. That's on purpose. It's by design. It's not by accident that we feel like that. They've designed us to feel like that, for us to feel like that. So unless that's just undoing all these smoke screens that have been put in front of us and saying, this isn't true. This isn't true,
So the World War II generation is called the greatest generation, right? And, granted, there were, men who served, in the Pacific theater and in Europe, who certainly had that class of individual. But there was also a lot of sacrifice done here at home as well. And we lump everyone in as part of that greatest generation, because it wasn't individualism that won World War II and got the United States, through a bleak period of time. It was, as you mentioned, everyone coming together to do their little part. And I'm not suggesting that, that the current crisis in Ukraine is anything similar, but we're complaining about the price of gas instead of figuring out ways around that, carpooling, less Uber Eats and DoorDash, taking a bus or, other forms of mass transit, or, hey, here's an idea. We just did this for the last 2 years, working from home more than driving, into the office. It's like today's generation hasn't learned from those, methods and tactics used during World War II. I don't know where I'm going with that, except to say that it just seems like, you mentioned like that collective cause, coming together, it taking a village, and we seem to have lost any notion for or appetite for even doing that because we're just so divided.
Yeah. I agree. I totally agree with what you're saying.
Jamison, you got questions? Anything more that came up in conversation there?
Yeah, I see one that says, how do you bring back progressives or leftists who have left or who decided the Dem Party isn't for them?
This is a really interesting question. I'm thinking through. I want to show you something right quick since that question came up. Look, check this out. This is the question I kind of wanted to ask at the end of it. And I want to speak directly to those progressives that you're talking about that have felt disenfranchised and alienated from the party right quick. Now, look, we could, as progressives, start our own party. We have a Green Party. It gets about 1% of the vote when we have it. We've even had ballots in all 50 states on the Green Party. I voted for the Green Party one time out of principle, okay? Because
please tell me it wasn't in 2000.
It was Jill Stein.
Okay.
Anyway, the reason I bring all that up is this, because they were talking about a Green New Deal way before AOC showed up. They're talking about a Green New Deal like 15 years before we're talking about Green New Deal today. This is not a new idea. The progressives have been wanting this for decades, okay? So we have to first realize that there's people in this country that have been wanting this for a really long time that feel sad that it didn't happen. And what I'm saying is we got to go to those people and say, hey, look, we can start our own party, but it's not going to win. There's only 2 parties in play right now. Now, eventually you may be able to build a party big enough to be able to compete, but we don't have that yet. Now, if you want to start that project, get it started, but it's not going to win for a while. It's going to win after a few, like 10, 20, 30 years, maybe can start winning. So start it if you want to start it. But right now, if we're going to try to change what's going on, the Democratic Party is the only vehicle through which we can win elections. Therefore, we have to come into a big tent party with people that make us feel uncomfortable to some degree. And they're going to be uncomfortable by us to some degree. But we're going to look at each other and be like, we're all we've got. Okay. And then, and what I think would be a winning strategy, what I would say to those disenfranchised progressives is, look, we have an organizational structure. You have to have that to change the country. You have to have energized participants, which is our movements. They're already ready for things to change, and they're willing to go out in the street, and some of them are willing to get hit in the face for it. I mean, there's really serious people in these movements. And we got to have a president who will read what the party wants and what the movements are saying and work with them to get that vision realized. I think Biden, if he was pushed more, I mean, the movements aren't strong enough on their own to affect a lot of this change that we would want to see. But if the party and the movements came together and it became, to some degree, the movements are always going to be outside the institution. But I think if we brought the movements in and says, we're going to semi-institutionalize you and make sure that the party and the movements are intertwined very deeply, I think it's a way forward. I think it's a way out of this. They win 4 years, we win 4 years. Their president executive orders away everything our president just did. Our president executive orders everything. Their president. It's like there's got to be a way to get out of this back and forth. Nothing's really changing. It's just we're just at a standstill. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to, I don't know. I'm not trying to say maybe you feel hopeless. Maybe you feel hopeless. Maybe you feel like people in power, even party power, don't really see you.
Mhm.
But you will be seen and you will be heard in the Democratic Party if you come in and start talking and start saying what it is you think should happen. People are in there that have enough empathy that will listen to what you have to say. I really believe that about the party. And we have a party that's very open to a lot of identities and ideas. So we should take advantage of that. The other party, not so much. Not so much. So,
I agree with what you're saying. I love the song. It's a great one. It's very popular. I would play it again and again and again. But again, I think it comes down to this. And I'm not trying to speak down, so please understand, Jamison, anyone else who's watching who's under the age of 30. If you want to be taken seriously, you have to show up and vote, and not just every 4 years. You have to show up for the midterms. You have to show up for the off-cycle elections. Like, how did we lose the Virginia governor's race? How did that happen? Again, we didn't have the turnout we had just a year prior. So that has to happen. I mean, I was watching a video today of a Florida state representative who, who went out and met with the students who were, protesting at the State House against the Don't Say Gay bill. And she was out there, they're chanting and she's dancing. She's right there with them all. That's great. But I mean, these are kids. They're probably not able to vote, most of them. But when they are, they darn well need to be showing up. Don't just be motivated when it's, a great little social experiment to make posters and make noise and show up on sidewalks. It has to be showing up at the polls. And again, not just every 4 years, not just every 2 years, every time your polling location opens, you got to be there. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? If policies and a laundry list of items that are important to younger people are going to ever be addressed, then the voter has to show the politicians, even the ones on the left, that, hey, I'm electing you because you said you're going to do this. Now I'm going to hold you accountable. And if you don't do it, then we're going to get rid of you in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years if it's a senator. That's the long and the short of it. And again, you can look at the numbers, 18 to 30 voters, they tend to show up better for presidentials. They don't show up for midterms. And you mentioned, going to Democratic Party meetings, and it's mostly older folks. If they're the ones constantly showing up at meetings and constantly showing up to the polling places, they're the ones who are going to be tended to.
So true. So true. Yes.
I love this cartoon though. I mean, you look, I mentioned Occupy Wall Street earlier, it's.
Yeah, there's a saying there's an old saying that the Democratic Party is the place that social movements go to die. And I thought that illustration was really represented that really well. Yeah, I think Occupy and a lot of these movements you see here on the screen have moved into the party's concerns. I mean, you see it in Sanders, Warren's candidacies in Occupy Wall Street. I think they had a lot of the same language, a lot of the same policies and ideas. So I think all these things have affected the party a lot, actually. But to look at it cynically, you think, well, golly, we had all these thriving movements and what happened to them, so some of them were institutionalized and we got great policies,
Mm-hmm.
and it really helped us and it's helping us. And some of their ideas were just left by the wayside. So,
but this also brings up, I think, an important point. What if, for example, Joe Biden decides he isn't going to run in 2024? He, after the midterms tells us that that's the case. Where's the bench? Who's next up? We don't have, and listen, I'm not looking for us to have the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Lauren Boeberts, but they do have a young, although crazy bench, a next wave of Republican that seems to be showing up. Where's the next wave of Democrat?
I'll be very curious. I mean, how many did we have last time in primaries? It was like 30. There was like 25.
There was a lot. Yeah, we did have a lot. I mean, when I think about under 50, I think of Pete Buttigieg. Is he it?
Yeah, he's great. Yang, I love Yang. Andrew Yang.
Yeah, well, I think Andrew Yang left the party.
Oh, did he?
I believe he left the party.
That's too bad because he has some good ideas.
Yeah, I think he left the party a little butthurt over the New York City mayoral debacle. I think
Yeah,
I believe he left the party.
I think that's just good. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I can't predict who it would be that would be able to overturn Biden. But
Well, there we are. Jamie, do we have any other questions? We're about 12 minutes out from wrapping this, but I wanted to make sure that we answered just about everybody chimed in.
I don't see any more questions in the live stream, but I have a question.
Yeah, I was just going to
Maybe
say, you have a question.
Yeah, mainly dealing with like the progressive. So I mean, I know I'm like a young person. I know other individuals as well. How do progressives, let's just say, incorporate more young people who have the same feelings like progressives do when it comes to certain movements, but when they see that these movements can't like establish ground based off like not having like any support from liberals or policy actions, that can kind of put them down. So how do progressives keep continuing to gain or put more young people in the fold as well to help their cause as well?
It's a great question.
yeah, I I've looked at a few different social movements, so I could give you a few ideas about this question because I just want to tell you a few successes that social movements have had and that how much it has impacted our country, not just our party, but our entire country. And so the party, when the movements can work outside the party and affect change. And when that happens, the party's gonna have to respond either way, you know, but I like what Ron said. He says, you can't give credit to the party when the credit's not due. You know, sometimes the movements do it themselves. But I mean, think about this. The Fight for 15 movement has gotten millions of people in our country $15 an hour. Whole entire cities, especially in our northern and northwestern cities, have moved to 15. Even stores like CVS and Walgreens are moving to 15. So there is a recognition in our culture. It's come part of our cultural consciousness that this number has been associated with a living wage. A living wage would probably be more like $18.50 an hour, to be honest.
I was just going to say we were fighting for 15 6 years ago. So 15.
Yeah, but I just want to say they've had a lot of big impacts on, and I would consider them the leaders of the new labor movement that we have in our country. The Poor People's Campaign is a group of people out of North Carolina with a moral budget. They've gotten a lot of gerrymandering overturned in North Carolina. They basically, the state Supreme Court said it was surgical racism what their state senators had done. And so they got to redraw the maps, the voting maps, so to make it more fair. As I mentioned, the teachers, the Red for Education, they're winning major gains. They're winning salaries, they're winning smaller class sizes, they're winning more days off, and so just better quality of life and be treated like professionals. The teachers really want that in this country. They're paid far lower than they should be, and so there's a lot of gains to be winning there. I say Black Lives Matter. We know this. Black Lives Matter is the biggest social movement our country has ever seen. They have a bill called the Breathe Act, which would take money away from our usual standard policing and redistribute that to mental health services, counselors, shut down the war on drugs. It would be more about investing in local communities and job programs.
But don't we have to move away from terminology like defund? I mean, if ever there was a larger, a bigger faux pas when it comes to verb.
Yeah, maybe the word, it's just the wording. You're talking about lunts. I mean, maybe the wording, maybe we should call it reapportion. It's not as catchy. Reapportion some of the city budget to health services. That's not as catchy as abolish the police. Or just, it's the same message. It's the same message. Because when they're saying abolish the police, it's not about abolishing the police. It's just about changing the police and saying every time a 911 calls through, you don't have to send a police. And actually, they don't know how to handle kids in schools. They're not trained with how to do this. They're not trained to deal with mental health crisis. And they show up and throw all these people, since we shut down all our mental institutions in the 80s. There's all these mentally people that need mental help, psychological help in prison. They're not trained to do all this. They're saying, let's reapportion some of this money to people who are actually trained to do these things, and we'd have a way better society. I mean, that's what Black Lives Matter is basically suggesting.
Right.
You know,
So
and you can go on and on, but what I want to say to your question, Jamison, is to say this. There's a lot to be proud of for movements. And even though all the policies that we want haven't gone through, I mean, think of the immigrants have been waiting in DACA for the DREAM Act. You know, they've been waiting for all this time. And we can't get these people to say, hey, yeah, you're actually an American citizen. You've been here the entire time. I mean, you might only know English. You might only lived in Nebraska your whole life, and they're worried about being sent to a place they've never been. I mean, we can't even tell them that. I mean, that is frustrating, right? It's very frustrating. But it doesn't mean we don't constantly just go back and say, hey, we want DREAM Act 2021 failed, DREAM Act 2022, DREAM Act 2023. I mean, you just have to just come back to the table and be like, this isn't going away. Like, this is something that has to be solved. I feel like a lot of these problems, it's like, well, let's kick the can down the road a little bit longer until we have to change. It's like, if you say no, a lot of movements are just saying, no, we have to change now. We have to change. It's too late. Actually, we should have changed 10 years ago, like, or whatever, you know? So I just want to say, even though it's hard to always feel like you see gains, there are gains happening all the times in all the movements. It's just, this isn't the stuff that's reported in the news. You know, this stuff you got to go search out their website and figure out what they think and everything. It's not as easy as a Facebook meme or something like that to encapsulate, you know. But I'm very proud of the movements in our country, and I think that we would be wise to listen to what they have to say.
Well, on that note, the name of our discussion was how progressive policies will win votes, and I think we kind of came to the conclusion early in this discussion that the Democratic Party really has to work on its outreach. I mean, is that a nice, quick, easy summation?
I think so.
Work on its outreach instead of convening every 4 years. Maybe they need to be barnstorming and hitting the road and having annual. CPAC has their annuals. Why are we not having a progressive PAC, big tent and lining up the politicians to come speak to woo us with, and for us to bend their ear on our programs. You know what? Maybe this is something you and I need to start.
Well, yeah.
Do you have an arena? I need an
We really should.
We just need an arena and a weekend. Do you have one?
I'm open.
Fair enough.
Anytime.
Jamison, I want to thank you for helping us out by manning the Q&A the section of this, and also for your question. I think it was a very prescient question. It's funny. Like, I remember, I'll never forget this. We were when I was living in Horry County, and we showed up at a function. I think her name was Shakidra, who Shakidra was even running for office at the time. And Shakidra mentioned that, in her part of Horry County, there were disillusioned, young voters of color. They may not have even been voters, but they were young people of color who just didn't believe that either party was there working for their behalf. And it really hurt my heart to hear that. But I also understand, being, again, a 48-year-old gay male who waited most of my adult life for gay marriage to get legislated through. And it never really did. The party that kept coming to me for donations and my voting support never really actually delivered that. Society delivered it, and the Supreme Court kind of had to act on it. So I appreciate, Jamison's question and for, pointing out that with, the under 30 voter, again, they want to see results. So we've got to get results seen. Dr. Holland, final thoughts before we wrap?
No, I think we covered it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank, Ashlyn and the folks at Grandstand Action Together for putting this conversation out, for inviting me to participate. I do appreciate that invitation. And Dr. Holland, I appreciate, all that you've done, not just in your role as professor at Horry Georgetown, but also for your help with the Horry County Democratic Party, and I assume with the SCDP, and for helping enlighten us all on, some of the things that need to be done, some of the things we actually have done. It's easy to forget when we've made gains and we're moving on to the next thing, but we do have to look back from time to time to see some of the things that we actually have gotten done as well.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to get to speak with Grand Strand Action together. I love it.
Same here. Jamison, thanks for participating, by the way, as an intern. I hope you're learning a lot through this process.
Yeah, I was just about to say it was a great discussion on you guys' thoughts, and it was a lot of food for thought that I can take into mind and discuss with other people as well. But I think so.
All right.
So yeah.
Appreciate that. All right, y'all. If you haven't done it yet, register and then get ready to vote. If you see there are impediments to your voting, it's time to start seeing them now and finding out an action plan to work around those. It's never too early to start doing that in an election cycle. All right, guys, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much, Grand Strand Action Together, for putting this together. You guys have a great evening.
See you later.